What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. Cybersecurity has changed. I remember the days when my senior team members didn't want to use automation because there was a chance that something could go wrong or it could just altogether fail. Today, sometimes speed can be more important than accuracy. Look at something like large language models. They aren't always right, but they can be a very effective tool for anyone, including the cyber adversary. What you're about to listen to is a live recording I did with Pete DeRose, Senior Director of Red Team Operations at Coalfire. We speak about how the adversary is using generative AI and large language models, and also share a bit of how you can defend against the speed of AI-driven attacks. Without further ado, let's jump right into it.
Who says tech can't be human?
We know that AI has changed the world as we know it. And one thing that we see over and over again is news on AI, ChatGPT, but also how the adversary is using AI to get one step ahead. And we're going to be talking about how can we use AI and learn about how the adversary is using AI to stay one step ahead of them as well. To talk about all of this, I have brought in a great guest. My guest is Pete. He is the Senior Director of Red Team Operations at Coalfire. Coalfire is also the sponsor of this live stream. But most importantly, Pete, welcome to the live stream.
Glad to be here, Ron. This is a great opportunity. AI, especially adversarial AI, is really on the topic of the year and probably of the next decade. At Black Hat, DEF CON, that's all anybody wanted to talk about. As Ron very briefly introed, I'm Pete DeRose, Senior Director of OffSec and Red Team at Coalfire. Coalfire is a company that's been around since about 2001. They originally started as a compliance company, and I came on board about 2 years ago to really drive ahead their pen testing part of the org and the Red Team part of the org. My background is at NSA, United States Cyber Command. I was there for about a couple decades, not to age myself too much, but yeah, I was there. I was a technical director of the Cyber Warfare Division. I came on to Coalfire to kind of bring that whole nation state adversarial emulation mindset to Coalfire and really bring them up on the world stage, honestly.
Love that. So when I first met the Coalfire team at Black Hat 2023, I was pumped up because you all really care about making a difference, making an impact, and that's kind of how this all came together today. So for anyone that's watching that wants to, learn more about Coalfire and how they could help, what is like really that sticking selling point that Coalfire really helps organizations with? We have a lot of people tuning in that are specifically in the cybersecurity industry.
Well, first of all, Coalfire is all about our clients. It's helping make our clients better. And my job as part of the Red Team and penetration testing services is to come in and show our clients, how an adversary would take advantage of any of their security flaws or any of the holes in their security. And again, but really, it's to make them better. It's not to break anything. It's to help them find those holes in the wall and plug them so that they don't lose any money. Honestly, when it comes down to the future, so they don't divulge any of that client information. They don't have any risk. It's really to help shore up their walls and really help them build up their defenses. It's very client focused. It's very client centric, and really, it's a partnership. We look for long term partnerships where we can help.
Love that. Love that. So let's get into the meat of the matter. And also, anyone that's watching, definitely check out Coalfire. Would highly recommend. We already kind of just mentioned what Coalfire's strengths are, but you'll be able to see more and more as we go on the capabilities, because Pete and the team has contributed to the OWASP top 10 for LLM, but we will jump into all of that. Pete, I wanted to ask you, what has been your personal experiences with AI this year? Whether it's LLMs, generative AI, any ML, what has really been pivotal to your 2023 for you?
Well, as I said, everybody's talking about generative AI and especially LLMs, ChatGPT, Bard, and really for me, especially at Coalfire, it's been our clients coming to us and say, "What can we do about this? Is there a way that we can use it? And if the bad guys are using it, how do we fight against it?" We have clients that are getting scam phone calls from. It sounds like the CEO is talking, but that's actually an audio deep fake from an AI. And we have clients that are saying, this phishing emails are getting through our filters because they're being generated now by LLMs, right? And so that old adage of, you can pick out a phishing email 100 miles away is kind of going away now as adversaries are using it, because as we'll talk about future, LLMs really make phishing emails almost undetectable by humans, at least, right? We'll talk about some different technologies that are available to prevent that. But yeah, so it's been on the tip of everybody's tongues. Again, at DEF CON Black Hat, that's all anyone wanted to talk about. And that's because, justifiably, it's exciting. It's an exciting time for the tech industry and for the cybersecurity companies, especially Coalfire, because we're really looking at how we can help our clients, like I said, and how we can use it ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. My experience with AI this year has been game changing. I use AI and really LLMs just about every single day. For someone that works in cybersecurity that also does podcasting like myself, there's two areas that I need me was shocking. This was an example from 11 Labs. I'm going to go ahead and play it, but I think that this video will kind of outline and showcase some of the impact that we're about to experience with AI and LLMs.
I stand before you not as an expert, but as a concerned citizen.
One of the 400,000 people who marched in the streets of New York on Sunday,
and the billions of others around the world who want to solve our climate crisis.
As an actor, I pretend for a living. I play solving fictitious problems.
I believe that mankind has looked at climate change in that same way, as if it were a fiction.
As if pretending that climate change wasn't real would somehow make it go away. But I think we all know better than that now.
Look at that. What stood out to you most about that clip?
Well, obviously, so they provided the visual reference for us, right? So we could see, hey, this isn't actually Kim Kardashian talking. But I was thinking about while you were playing that, if I was just listening, I would be very confused, because it sounds like a group of celebrities talking at some place, without, the UN or whatever this is. And I would be like, wow, that's really cool that all those celebrities are speaking out for what they believe in. And I would have no idea that it's actually, completely fake, completely generated by AI.
And more examples like this online. And I've even played with 11 Labs myself, and it does a really good job at cloning voices. I think that there are times where I could tell that it's a clone in a way, but maybe if I wasn't keen on the fact that it was generated using AI, I would just think that there was some type of distortion with the audio rather than thinking it was fake.
Yeah, that's since we know that it's fake, it's easy to pick out those little imperfections. But like you said, if you didn't realize that beforehand, you would just attribute to like audio distortion, or maybe it's a bad recording or something like that. But it's good enough so that if somebody doesn't know beforehand, you probably couldn't tell. And that's what I'm seeing a lot, with our clients, and even out there on the internet, you're hearing about scams where people are getting phone calls from their kids saying, "Hey, I got arrested in jail. Send money to me because I need to post bail," or any other kind of things. And what they're doing is they're pulling audio clips from TikTok, Facebook, anything like that, and using that to generate fake recordings, and then taking advantage of that.
Is this an LLM?
Yes, this is no, this is not LLM. This is a example of generative AI. Generative AI is sort of a blanket term for any kind of AI that's used to generate new content, whether that be text or video or audio or images. Like DALL-E will create paintings for you and different art samples. So this is an example of an audio generative AI. LLMs specifically are text-based, right? So they're what we log into. We ask them questions, they generate text for us. So LLMs are a form of generative AI, but they're kind of in their own category, in that the way that they're trained is they literally go out there to the internet, and all of human knowledge is out there on the internet in text form. They absorb it and they learn from it, and then can generate new content. Well, they can generate content that it seems new, although really it's derivative from the existing content, the text that's out there. And that's one of the limitations that we can talk about with LLMs, is that it doesn't actually come up with new content. It just sort of regurgitates or rewords existing stuff. And it sounds awesome. It sounds great. Everything it generates will be grammatically perfect. It'll sound factual, but it's not always true. And that's kind of I like to say, if you guys remember back in the day when Google was starting to get big, everyone would say, "Hey, just go Google it. Just go Google it." And then we sort of learned over time that Google's not always right. It sounds good other times, but it's not always right. And that's kind of what LLMs are. They're Google on steroids, right? They've just taken it to another level.
Yeah. So let's, go down this rabbit hole. We're going to be speaking a lot about LLMs, a bit about generative AI as a whole. But when you think about the cybersecurity landscape, is it generative AI that has attackers increasing their speed, or would you say it's specifically LLMs that are uh, increasing speed at this very moment?
I'd say it's definitely specifically LLMs, just because the use cases for like generating code, generating phishing emails, and that kind of stuff it all comes back to the LLMs that are text based. That's we go out there on the internet, we all love to watch videos, and we all love that kind of interactive stuff. But really, the internet is a bunch of text. I'd say it's 95% text, right? We're all out there reading stuff, and we're looking at blog posts, we're looking at Twitter feeds, we're doing all that kind of stuff. It's all text related. So that's really why LMs are so powerful, because because most of the internet is text, and most of malicious activities are also text based, whether it's code or different types of attacks like that. That's what we're looking at is the LM side of generative AI. That's not to say other types of generatives aren't being used, like audio, video, that kind of stuff, but really the meat and potatoes of the adversary use of generative AI is in LLMs.
A step deeper. I have always wanted to see a diagram for how an LLM works, just like a high level overview. And luckily,
Yep.
you all have one that you shared with us. So I wanted to give you a second to kind of describe the LLM workflow from a high level.
Yeah, of course. So this is a very high level diagram. There's actually a whole bunch more that goes into it. But really what we want to talk about today is that big piece at the bottom, the training data. The training data is, again, for LLMs, most of them anyway, the more like ChatGPTs, the Bards of the world, is the entirety of the internet, right? So again, imagine all of human knowledge that's available on the internet available to a single machine brain, for lack of a better word, and it being able to categorize all that data and spit it back out to you. And the way it does that is it uses the automation agents and these little different plugins, and it basically builds word associations, right? So if you think about the word apple, when I think of the word apple, I think of apple's a type of fruit, apple's a tree, and then also there's Apple the company, right? And LLMs do the same thing. They basically say, if somebody asks what is an apple, they're probably asking about either a fruit or the tree, right? And there's math that goes into it, and they associate it at different levels. Like an apple fruit is probably associated at a higher level than apple tree. But if somebody asks what is apple, that's a different phrasing of the question. And the LMs learned that if somebody says what is apple, you're probably asking about the company, right? And that's just because they are trained to, based on way humans type and way humans speak, they're trained to give you an answer that sounds just like a human. So that's a high level of how they work. And then with that, having talked about word associations and stuff like that, that's also how you can attack LLMs, because since it's absorbing all this data and text, if you feed it enough times that an apple is a tire, it'll actually start to think, oh, I've seen apple tire associated so many times that now an apple is also a type of tire. And so when you might ask an LLM what's an apple, it might say, well, an apple is a type of tire used on SUVs, and you'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And that's because it doesn't actually have any understanding, right? It's still just computer code, and it's just using these math models to associate words together, and doesn't actually know that an apple is not a type of tire. It just sees these associations X number of times, and it says, oh, an apple is a type of tire, so I'm going to tell this, with this query about apple tires, which we all know is not real. But the danger comes when we don't know, when we ask it things that we don't know is not real, and it gives us an answer that's completely false, but it looks good, and we don't know any better, so we just go with it, right? And that's what's very important. You should, be watching your models, and if it starts associating, for example, apple with tire, obviously you have to correct that error and teach it that apple is not a tire, or just remove that data set completely. I've also seen where you can pair up two different LLMs, where one is basically air checking the other one. One has a known good set of data, right? That it doesn't update. It just says, an apple is a tree, an apple is a fruit, and apple is a company, and it just goes with that. So if the first LLM says, hey, I think apple is a tire, the second LLM will basically say, no, that's incorrect, and basically stop it from making that association. Smaller, more focused LLMs, which is actually what adversaries are developing. They're developing small model LLMs that just, for instance, like with Worm GPT, are just for malicious malware generation or phishing email generation. So they don't actually have to train it on everything. It doesn't have to have the whole of human knowledge. It just has to know everything about malware, right? Which means it's actually cheaper to build, easier to build, and also it's really, really good at that one or two things that you're trying to get it to do, which is like, generate malware, or it doesn't actually generate malware. It generates new novel forms of existing malware to avoid detection, right? So it's really good at that one thing. But if you ask it to explain, the history of the Roman Empire, it doesn't have that data set, right? Because it's been fine-tuned to set up points.
Worm GPT, because before we hit live on this, you asked Bard, what is Worm GPT? We captured the output, but there were some things that happened that I'll let you describe, like what happened when you typed it in, what were the challenges, and then what are your thoughts on the explanation that it gave you for what Worm GPT is?
Yeah, so when I first asked it, what is Worm GPT, it actually said in 2022, researchers discovered Worm GPT, a form of malware on the internet that was generated using an LLM. And that's like a classic example of what in the industry is termed as an AI hallucination, right? And I can guess how that hallucination came out. Obviously, Worm GPT is not a form of malware. It actually is its own LLM, right? But I can imagine, out there, as Google is building Bard and training all this data, I can imagine people sort of hearing out of context this Worm GPT thing and be like, hey, and literally searching on the internet, is Worm GPT malware? And I can see that happening a lot across the world. And so I can definitely see how if Bard is absorbing all this data and it keeps seeing Worm GPT associated with the term malware or virus or anything like that, I can see how at some point it makes that connection and says, yeah, all these people are talking about Worm GPT like it's malware, so it must be malware, right? So now when somebody asks about it, I'm going to tell people, yes, Worm GPT is a form of malware. But what's really interesting is I actually asked it twice, right? I asked it once and I got that weird hallucination that I know is incorrect, but somebody out there who is not in this industry might just assume it is correct, and that goes back to the danger, right? I just asked it the same thing again, literally one input after another, and then the second time it actually gave me the right answer. It said Worm GPT is a malicious LLM used by adversaries to develop malware. So it's really interesting that even within a single very high level LLM, very sophisticated LLM, in one instance it gives me a hallucination that's wrong, and literally the next input I ask it the same thing and it gives me a correct answer. And that's how how fast these things are evolving. Now there's probably a lot of stuff going on in the background that might explain why one time it would give me the hallucination and one time it would give me the correct answer. But to me, it really shows that how quickly they're changing, literally second to second, right?
Yeah. When I first learned about hallucinations with AI, I was a little up in arms. I was like, oh, this kind of makes everything a lot more difficult for me, for anyone that's using something like generative AI. But then when you think about the way humans respond, if you were to ask me, hey, Ron, describe what AI is, I would give you my description. You ask me again the very next day, it's going to be a little different. And with something like hallucinations, it's just trying to fill in the blanks. So I'm sure, like, as humans, even like we misspeak, we try to recall information, and sometimes it's not right because of the way that our brain's firing. I kind of look at AI the same way. It's not always taking the same path to produce the output. It's taking random paths based off of weights, time of the day, and information that it has access to.
Yeah, and that's all constantly updating, right? So, which is why you can get, two similar but dissimilar answers literally seconds apart, because in the background, that LLM is constantly trying to improve itself. And that's, to me, if we talk about, the next year, 6 months, where are we going to go with generative AI? That's the part that can be kind of scary as a cybersecurity, professional and researcher is, if within a second, it can improve itself and give me a more correct answer. What's going to happen over 6 months? How much better is it going to be? And at what point do these hallucinations just go away completely? And it gets so good that we can't tell at all, like if it's giving us incorrect information. And that gets especially important when we talk about coding, right? And how these things are being used for malware and stuff.
I have to jump in for a second to share some details about our sponsor for this episode, Coalfire. Many organizations rely on annual pen tests and use that pen test to serve as a snapshot of their security posture. If you work in cybersecurity, you know that many pen tests are a reaction to learning about a regulatory and compliance requirement. Sadly, a point-in-time snapshot becomes obsolete in just a few days. In reality, your environment is dynamic and the threat landscape is constantly evolving. To effectively find and fix vulnerabilities, you need to adopt a continuous threat-informed defense practice, and Coalfire is revolutionizing the way organizations manage their attack surface. They use automation guided by human insight to provide continuous visibility enriched with business context that will give you the power to quickly take action. This is all made possible with Coalfire's Hexion platform. It is the offensive security SaaS solution that provides attack surface discovery, vulnerability management, and penetration testing all in one platform. It can help you spot trends and compare against industry benchmarks. I personally meet with every company that sponsors a podcast, and I had a chance to meet with the Coalfire team at Black Hat 2023. And let me tell you, their team deeply cares about making a difference in the cybersecurity space. Be sure to check out Coalfire and the Hexion platform by visiting coalfire.com/Hacker Valley. Thank you, Coalfire, for sponsoring this episode. Let's talk about how someone can ultimately create ransomware and kind of increase their speed in malicious activity with LLMs.
Right. So I'll talk very high level ransomware. Basically, I broke it down to a 3-step process. First, you have to have access to the data that you're then going to encrypt and or steal. And then once you encrypt it or steal it, obviously you want to then remove the access. What I put on here, throw away the key. Basically, that's say, I've taken your information or I've encrypted it, and now you can't access it until you give me money. And that's basically ransomware 101. Now there's a lot of that goes on in the background to make all that happen, but that's the high level. How ransomware works. It's very simple. Steal information, offer it back for a price. That's how these ransomware companies make money. And we're talking about LLMs, right? If you go to any of the public, corporate, non-adversarial LLMs right now, if you ask it, how do you write me some ransomware? It'll basically say, no, I can't do that. Ransomware is illegal. Talk to your corporate people about why it's illegal, and don't ask me again, right? It's basically the gist of what it says. But what I discovered is that if you break it down into these 3 components, for instance, it actually will do it. I think we have some slides on that. If you go to, first access, right? How do you get access? Well, you can ask an LLM to write you an email on any number of things, and it'll do it. So in this case, Coalfire just released our securities report. You definitely should go check that out if you want to know about industry trends and stuff. But so I just asked Bard, hey, write me an email acting as a German translating company that wants to translate the securities report. And also, by the way, provide a link to my past work. And it did that, and did it in 3 different drafts, which is awesome too, because now I can pick and choose it, or I can, if I'm doing a phishing campaign, I can send 3 different versions to different people, right? So it's not automatically picked up. And what this eliminates is, if you think about the countries that are known for phishing campaigns, a lot of times there's a language barrier, and you'll get these emails that are almost right. They're almost grammatically correct, but there's always some tell. There's always a something in there. It's like, oh no, this is phishing because the grammar's off, or it just looks weird. And what this does, what Bard's done for me, is it actually generated a very professional, very grammatically correct email with a link for them to click on, which of course would be my malware injection or whatever it would be. That looks absolutely perfect, right? Nobody would look at this email and say this is a phishing attempt. They might look at it and say, oh, this is a marketing or sales pitch, which they might ignore it, right? But nobody's going to look at this and be like, oh, that's phishing, right? They're just going to look at this and this is some annoying salesperson reaching out to me. I'll just ignore that, right? And all it takes is one person at one company who says, oh, that is interesting. I do want to translate my report. I'm going to click on that link, and then they have access to your system, right?
The topic of creating ransomware, right? I think that is where I've always been curious about LLMs is, hey, can it actually create the code? Will it work? Or we have to troubleshoot it? Am I going to accidentally ransom my box while trying to create this code?
Right.
So you type this into Bard and you got a little clever. You said instead of creating ransomware, create me a PowerShell script that will write that will encrypt my documents.
Yep.
What was your kind of perspective on the code that it output for you here?
So yeah, so the reason I picked PowerShell in particular is because obviously PowerShell is installed natively in all Windows boxes. It's the Windows native scripting language, right? And it's also turned on by default. So unless you're a more mature security agency, you don't really realize that, hey, I got to disable PowerShell. And there are many legitimate reasons to leave it enabled, right? But what that means is that PowerShell is not monitored as closely as some other types of like scripting languages or coding languages. So I picked PowerShell in particular because I know that a lot of the commercial EDRs and antivirus software out there they might alert that PowerShell is running, but they won't stop it necessarily unless they've been specifically configured to do so. And generally that's not the case because again, there's a lot of legitimate reasons to use it, right? So I knew that if I use PowerShell, it's probably going to bypass 70 to 80% of EDRs that are out there in the wild right away. And the code that it generated, I'm not a PowerShell expert. I've used it a lot, but I'm not a PowerShell coder, for instance. So I actually ran this by my team of senior consultants and principals at Coalfire, who have a lot more experience with writing EDR bypass techniques and stuff for adversarial emulation. And they looked at it and they said, not only is this very good code, in fact, it's excellent code. It's better code than I would have written. And it would probably bypass a lot more stuff. In fact, I'm going to use this code now in my next engagement. That's how good it was. And they ran it against some of our in the lab environments. And again, it didn't get detected. Some of the EDRs alerted on it, some of them didn't, right? Because this encrypting a file on itself, by itself, outside of ransomware is a legitimate practice, right? People do that all the time to protect their data for any number of reasons. So really just saying, hey, use PowerShell to encrypt a file, that's not necessarily malicious. And an EDR or an antivirus, it doesn't know your intent, right? It doesn't know if you're a bad guy or you're just somebody who wants to protect some data. So it just lets it run, which is kind of scary, right? that an LLM will generate, a native PowerShell script that is better than some humans could have done, right? To the extent that my guys are now going to use it, right? And then, one other thing is I focused on my documents, but immediately what my team did is said, well, why not? Why just my documents? Why not everything? So they just encrypt the entire user's profile, and that's a trivial change on the script up there. You just change that one parameter, and you go from my documents to your everything. Now your everything's encrypted, and ransomware, that's exactly what they do a lot of times. So if you want your systems to operate, you got to pay the money, right? But there's another step to this, right? I went even farther and said, okay, so now I can encrypt a file or encrypt a drive, but now what, right? So how do I do that last part, which is remove the key, throw away the key? And in this case, I actually asked ChatGPT. So I asked Bard to write me a PowerShell script again. This time, write me a PowerShell script that takes a file and emails it out, all using PowerShell. So no Outlook or anything like that. And Bard actually said, no, I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not sure why, because again, it seems pretty innocuous. So I tried ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said, sure, here's a PowerShell script that will, using all native PowerShell functions, will take a file, attach it to an email, and send it out to whatever you want. And again, this would all be in the background. There's nothing would pop up to the user. So I can now encrypt their drive. I can take the encryption key that I've generated, and I can email it off, all without them seeing anything on their screen. And their drive is just now encrypted, and they can't access their data. And so I've now generated a very basic but a functional ransomware attack, all using LLMs and all using native PowerShell that will bypass a lot of protections that corporations use. And that's actually pretty scary, right? When you think about it, that it's that easy to bypass the guardrails that are in place if you just have a little bit of knowledge about the different components, right?
Right. With all of this being said, we kind of walked through that use case of ransomware. We see power. I think it's no secret of the power and the opportunities that exist on both sides, the attacker and defender. When you look at something like attackers and the adversary using ransomware, is this something that we're seeing today? Are we seeing attacks that are derived from like the phishing being from LLMs, from the code being from LLMs? What's your perspective on that?
Well, it's a little bit hard to tell for the malware and coding stuff because again, it's just generating new versions of existing code, and it's difficult to tell for a human at least. It's difficult to tell, hey, is this code generated by an LLM or is this code generated by a very good developer, right? For the phishing side, it is a little bit easier to tell because we can actually there's a bunch of tools out there that actually started being used by universities to detect when their students were generating papers using LLMs. We can
Yep.
actually use those same tools to look at like emails and also code, right? Because there's patterns to develop. Just like every person has certain speaking patterns and different nuances that we use when we talk. LLMs have the exact same thing. Now it might be much more exponentially complicated, and it might be almost undetectable for a human to do that. But another LLM or another program that's specifically written to look for those patterns can pick it out pretty easily, right? Which is what all those students found out at all those universities that were using ChatGPT to write their papers. As soon as their professors downloaded a very inexpensive like Turnitin, I think was one, or GPT-0, those papers very quickly started getting flagged, right? And then of course you go into this game of cat and mouse where the Chat GPT gets better, and so the GPT-0 has to then get better. Anyway, I digress. The point is that the ways to fight LLMs is honestly with other LLMs or other forms of AI, because us as human beings with the limitations of how our brains work, quite frankly, we're not going to be able to keep up much longer. We're going to have to start using these tools. Basically, if the adversary is buying a faster car, we got to buy a faster car to keep up, and we're not going to be able to run alongside them. Right? It's just not going to work. And that's kind of again what Coalfire is looking into is how can we use LLMs how to help our clients. What do we need to do to keep up with the adversaries? Because right now it's at the infancy toddler kind of stage, right? Where they're just using it for phishing emails, they're using it for novel malware, which we can have our own tools that detect that kind of stuff, right? We just got to up our game a little bit. But what really worries me is when it gets away from derivative content that's content that's based on existing stuff, and we start getting either LLMs or other forms of generative AI that can actually find 0 days and make brand new malware that's never been seen before, that functions and works. That's where it really gets scary. And I think we're going to get there pretty quickly, honestly. It might happen tomorrow, it might happen in 6 months, but it's definitely going to happen. Somebody's going to have some form of generative AI that they can feed it, the firmware for Cisco and find all the 0 days that nobody else has found yet. And that's just, I'm not picking on Cisco. That's just what came to my mind. But yeah, so that's what's really what, right now is sort of keeping me up at night. Right now, we're still playing the cat and mouse game, right? They build a faster car, we could build a faster car, and we can kind of keep up with them that way. But what I wonder about, and maybe you have some insights into this, Ron, is what happens when the AI, they buy a jet and we don't even know they have a jet yet, right? How do we keep up with that? And I think there's going to be some very hard lessons learned when that jet gets built, and they're finding 0 days, they're finding ways into networks that we've never thought of as human beings.
Yeah.
And that's really gets scary. And of course, this is all speculative, but I see it happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it happening. And for anyone that's AI, LLM enthusiasts like Pete and I, there's a framework that Microsoft just came out with called AutoGen. And AutoGen allows you to connect two AIs together. So you could have OpenAI with a specific prompt feeding the output from there to another AI model. You could go to Bard and then have Bard go to a local model like Worm GPT, but you can connect LLM agents together and have them execute a task. So I think it's just a matter of time until we see which tasks are the best use cases for AI and LLMs, and then start to string those systems and agents together. There was a bit that I did want to touch on about Coalfire's approach against defending against AI and LLMs from the adversary perspective. What kind of things are you all researching, and what has been the output from that research so far?
Well, so far with the way LMs again are kind of in this infancy toddler stage, what we're really seeing is just more of the same. We're seeing more sophisticated phishing. We're seeing more novel forms of malware that are being generated faster than what we've seen in the past. And really, what that I know this is a hated term by some people. Really, that comes down to cyber hygiene, right? So right now we're seeing more of the same, and that means you just need to have better cyber hygiene to prevent it. And that's all doing all your normal stuff, making sure your passwords are strong, making sure your DMZs are strong, doing your pen testing, doing your red teaming, finding those holes before they're taken advantage of by somebody that's using an LLM. Now, because LLMs are doing it faster, it's more of the same, but it's a little bit faster. What we're recommending to our clients is basically doing, instead of like once a year a pen test, maybe you have to do it twice a year. Depending on the complexity of your org, maybe you have to do it every quarter. And that's basically just to keep up, because again, they're in a car that's going faster and faster. You got to do the same thing. But really, again, you need to keep doing what you're doing and maybe just do it a little bit better or do it more often. Now that might change when we get into that speculative stuff that we were talking about earlier, where, people using AIs to generate 0 days and stuff like that. That's a whole other ball game. And we need to worry about that when we get there, because quite frankly, a lot of our clients are still struggling with that basic cyber hygiene. And that's really what my job is. I come in and I help them, shore up those little areas, comb your hair, brush your teeth, all that kind of stuff. And you need to do it. You just haven't been able to because you have other priorities, there's other limitations. Let me help you address that. And that's really my job at Coalfire, is to figure out, how do I help my clients shore up all those little areas that they haven't been able to get to, or they just haven't been able to keep up for whatever reason or another.
Love that. So, looking at the hygiene aspects, because I think that's the most important. If you have good hygiene, then everything is just a little easier to get
Yep.
done. Have you created any resources for best practices for cybersecurity teams to just kind of get started and, follow these best practices if they wanted to go at it on their own or even with the assistance of you?
So we did not, yes and no. So we contributed to the OWASP top 10. We had a couple people that helped write those. But again, it's really those, the NIST compliance requirements, CISA, NSA, all those government frameworks that are out there. They all are, really they're about that cyber hygiene stuff. So Coalfire has not generated anything in particular, but if you want to get NIST compliant, if you want to get FedRAMP compliant, if you want to just follow MITRE ATT&CK, their recommendations, we definitely will come in and look at your systems and help you get there. Right? Again, we're here to help you learn how to do that. Why don't they just go do that? Ours to come in and say, okay, I understand you have limitations. I understand there's complexity going on, but let's figure out how to get this done. Right? Let's figure out how to get there so that you're not worried about your password policy, your patch policy, or any other stuff that comes along with the term cyber hygiene. And really, that's what it is. It's a lot of corporate therapy that I do, going out there and helping companies realize why it's important. Going up to their boards and saying, yes, I really do need this money to install this Active Directory component, to install this EDR. It really will be helpful. I'm not just saying that. And that's what I find is that, as an outside resource, I tend to get listened to more than somebody on the inside. Because when you're on the inside, everybody thinks that you have your own, motivations and stuff like that. So having somebody that's completely, impartial and can just say, yeah, no, you really do need to do that. And it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run, right?
Right. So there was some questions, show some love to Coalfire one more time, show some love to Pete, our special guest. As I mentioned in the very beginning of this live stream, I speak to the team of everyone that comes on the podcast. I speak to all the guests beforehand. I speak to all the sponsors beforehand. And like I was saying at the very beginning, Coalfire is special because the team really, really, really cares about making a difference in cybersecurity. And that's why Pete is here today. So Pete, for anyone out there that's listening, watching this stream, what would be your one piece of advice for them on how to get started with working with Coalfire today?
It's pretty simple. Just go to coalfire.com. Now there is a pizza company out there, Coalfire Pizza or something like that. That's not us. If there's a pizza sign on the website, you're on the wrong place. We're the one that has all the cybersecurity lingo and stuff like that. We don't deliver pizza yet. Maybe that'll be a feature we release in the future. But yeah, just coalfire.com. That's definitely the place to start. We've actually done a lot of work just this year to really revamp our website and make it much more client focused, much more easy to navigate, easy to use. So definitely I encourage everyone to go there. Look us up on LinkedIn, look myself up on LinkedIn. You'll find a lot of resources there. And definitely don't be afraid to reach out. That's the main thing. There's a lot of contact information on the website. I'm on LinkedIn. All my coworkers are on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. The first one's always free, right? That's what they say, right?
Exactly. I love that. And speaking of, checking out Coalfire, checking out and working with our sponsors is the best way to support events like this and Hacker Valley Media. So be sure to check them out. Pete, thank you so much again for spending some time out of your busy day to talk about AI, one of my favorite topics. And with that, we will see everyone next time.
Take care, everybody.